Meeting. I'm Eric Davis, Chair of the Board, and I call this meeting to order. Delighted to welcome all board members, advisors, staff, on-site visitors, online listeners, and Twitter followers. Remember to follow the North Carolina State Board of Education on Twitter at EDStateBoard_NC. You can also view all meeting materials and follow the meeting online. I remind the audience and those listening that this body meets monthly with its official meeting scheduled for the first Thursday of the month. Committee meetings are held on Wednesday prior to the official meeting day, as was the case yesterday when the board met to discuss its committee agenda items. Our May agenda was approved yesterday, so we'll proceed under that approved agenda with one adjustment, and that is to add under the chair report an item titled Bridges Academy Claim, as discussed in closed session. Board members, you're reminded that it's our duty to avoid conflicts of interest and the appearance of conflicts of interest as we handle the work of this board. Does any member of the board know of any conflict of interest or any appearance of conflict with respect to any matters coming before us at this meeting? If so, please state them for the record. If during the course of the meeting you become aware of an actual or apparent conflict of interest, please bring the matter to the attention of the chair. It will then be your duty to abstain from participating in discussion on the matter and from voting on the matter. This time I turn to my colleague, Ms. Amy White, to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Ms. White. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We now come to our special recognitions, a time on our agenda when we recognize significant awards, proclamations, resolutions, and those who make a difference in the lives of our public school students we serve each day. Yesterday, we had the good fortune to swear in our newest board member, Mr. John Blackburn, and we welcome him to our team representing the Northwest region. John, we look forward to working with you and gaining from your knowledge and expertise. And I have to admit, just personally, hearing you take the oath of office reminded me of my own commitment to this state, and I'm sure the rest of us in the room when we've taken similar oaths. So you've already given us a great gift in that event yesterday. So, Mr. Blackburn.
Thank you so much. What a great honor it is to be here. My life, I grew up in Avery County, small town, went to public schools there, and learned so much from many of my teachers, coaches, administrators. And I think the one thing that I've taken away from that is a great mentor of mine said, life is a three-legged stool. And North Carolina provides a very robust three-legged stool. One is jobs. North Carolina does great work with providing good jobs. Health education. We need to make sure that everyone in the state has proper health and understands health education. But the most important, and the reason I'm most excited about being on this board, is teaching the youngsters of North Carolina. So I have enjoyed my work on the university system, but this is a real pleasure and calling for me. So I look forward to learning and working with all of you, and it's a great honor to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Blackburn. We now have an honor to hear from one of our key partners, the Department of Health and Human Services, and Dr. Charlene Wong, the Assistant Director for Children and Families, is with us today. Dr. Wong.
Thank you so much. I'm so pleased to be here. Just wanted to double check my audio is okay for you guys?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
All right, wonderful. Well, I'm very pleased to be here today with you all to talk a little bit about children's behavioral health in North Carolina, and specifically the work that we're doing in partnership with our school partners and other stakeholders around supporting students' behavioral health in schools. Next slide, please. So children's behavioral health is a top priority for our North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services. In our department, we have three main priority areas, and children's behavioral health is actually touched by all three of them. So the first is behavioral health and resilience, and obviously children's behavioral health being an important component of that. The second is an area that I'm working very closely on, which is child and family well-being, really thinking about how can we support the whole child, the whole family. So that means their physical and emotional needs, their social needs, working to help also support their educational needs with partners. And then finally, strong and inclusive workforce. And certainly we know that our workforce that is trained and available to support children's behavioral health is an area that we want to continue to grow and strengthen. Next slide, please. And specifically, children's behavioral health and schools are called out in our recently released strategic plan for the Department of Health and Human Services. So you can see one of the key strategies in the box is to increase access to children's mental health services by expanding mental health services in schools, as well as in primary care and in specialty care. Next slide, please. And unfortunately, we all know that students' mental health and children's mental health, these are challenges that have been really increasing over the last decade. So this was unfortunately already happening before the pandemic. So when you look at here just some data points looking at symptoms, so for example, from 2009 to 2019, the proportion of high school students who reported that they were feeling really persistently sad or hopeless actually rose by 40% over that decade. During that same time period, we also saw a 36% increase in students seriously considering or attempting suicide. And not surprisingly, that really translates to what we see in utilization of our healthcare system. So from 2011 to 2015, we saw almost a third increase, 28% increase nationally of young people who were showing up in emergency rooms because of depression, anxiety, and behavioral health challenges. Next slide. So we know that the COVID-19 pandemic really worsened what was already a growing challenge for young people. On the left for national trends, these are some recent data that came out of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. You can see that 37% of young people experienced poor mental health during COVID-19. And 44% reported experiencing that feeling of persistent sadness or hopelessness in the last year. And this was not felt equally across our young people. So females and our LGBTQ plus youth saw worse mental health threats during COVID-19. On the right side of the slide, sorry, if you can go back up to the last slide, thank you. On the right side of the slide, we've included some trends specifically looking at young people in North Carolina. So an estimated about 3,600 North Carolina children have lost a parent or a caregiver to COVID-19. And obviously that sort of tragedy is a huge trauma for young people. Also in North Carolina, we've seen a 46% increase in young people with one or more major depressive episodes during the pandemic. So that's really an increase there. And then, some estimates showing that the rate of children discharged from our emergency departments in North Carolina for a behavioral health condition or emergency has increased by some estimates, up to 70% during the pandemic. So real impact on our healthcare system as well. Next slide, please. We also want to acknowledge what are protective factors, and what we know is that feeling close to people at school provides really important protection for students. So what you can see on the slide, again, recent data from the CDC. In the blue column, these are students who felt close to people at school, versus in the orange column, students who didn't feel as close to people at school. And when you look down the rows at things like, what proportion of young people were experiencing that sadness or hopelessness or seriously considering or attempting suicide, or actually, unfortunately attempting suicide in the past year, you can see that in the blue column on the left, those students who felt close to people at school, they were less likely to have experienced some of those behavioral health symptoms and challenges compared to those who didn't feel close to people at school. Next slide. So we in North Carolina are taking several actions to address the child behavioral health crisis that we see in our state and that is mirrored really across the country. So here I've linked to a plan that we recently released. This is a coordinated action plan. And this really outlines 13 strategies to pursue as a starting point in addressing the child behavioral health crisis. Many of these strategies are really focused on children who are in the care of our child welfare system, who have complex or more intensive behavioral health needs, and many of the strategies would be available for those children as well as a broader population. I'll highlight when you look at these 13 strategies that we recommend pursuing as a starting point, and I should back up and say these are strategies that were prioritized and developed with a large multi-sector stakeholder team, including folks from across our Department of Health and Human Services, as well as external partners like our payers and our healthcare providers and our local agencies like our local divisions of social services, for example. When you look at these 13 strategies that we as a group prioritized, they fall into two categories. The first is expanding treatment services that prevent children from being removed from their homes or experiencing multiple placements. These are things like services and treatments that can be delivered in the community, like what are called wraparound services pilots, and expanding those statewide so that children, either in the care of child welfare or who have complex behavioral health needs not in the care of child welfare, can get really intensive supports wrapped around them and their family while they're living at home in the community. Also, our MORS mobile crisis intervention teams. These are special teams that are really trained to work with children and families specifically who are experiencing a behavioral health emergency. They include people like a family support partner so that when a child is really having a behavioral health emergency, the family is able to call and get one of these specially trained teams to come and support them, including supports and treatments for the child as well as for the family at the same time. And these types of teams, for example, we know really make a difference for children and families, being able to keep them in their home as opposed to, for example, needing to go to the emergency room, and making sure that they get connected with the treatments and supports that they need. I'll also highlight the expansion of the NC-PAL program statewide. This is a telephone consultation system for primary care providers and piloting with other entities so that they can reach, and I'm a primary care provider myself, so that I can call a child psychiatrist when I am in the clinic with a patient in front of me and I'm not quite sure what to do, having really ready, timely access to a child psychiatrist so that we can really provide those behavioral health supports when we have a child in front of us. The other set of strategies are really focused on connecting children to expanded care placement options more quickly. Next slide. So when we're thinking about our work now to really support children's and students' behavioral health in school, we have engaged multiple partners. So of course we see the icon for the Department of Health and Human Services. We're working very closely with leadership and team members from the Department of Public Instruction, as well as representatives from the Governor's Office. We're also starting to work with our colleagues from Department of Public Safety, thinking about the intersection with our juvenile justice systems. And then we've also engaged with other local and national partners. So as an example, there's a group called ASTHO, which has selected North Carolina as one of a handful of states to provide pretty intensive technical assistance and support to, because we're really trying to do even more to support student behavioral health in schools. We're also working with some of our philanthropic and other local partner entities that are also very focused on supporting student behavioral health, like the Duke Endowment and Carinova, which is an agency or entity that is existing and doing work across youth behavioral health in North and South Carolina. So again, really engaging this multi-sector group so that we can get even more in place more quickly for students in North Carolina. So here's our roadmap that this group and that we're working on together. So the first step in the roadmap is that we really identified the need for doing a landscape, identifying who are the leaders and partners and stakeholders engaged in that work. That's how we have already started engaging sort of these broader groups, is through our work on the landscape. We have been looking across policies as well as existing funding streams and programs and projects, and have identified shared goals and outcomes. We're quite far in the landscape already. As we've been doing the landscape, we are also doing a gap analysis and identifying where there are opportunities to strengthen because we have deficits or gaps, and also identifying new partners through that work from the public and the private sector. Again, we're quite far along in that work as well, and we'll continue to build upon the landscape and gap analysis as we do this work together. We are now really focused on solutioning, recognizing that we can, should, and need to do more to support students' behavioral health. And so these are just a list of some of the types of solutions that are being considered across our group. So for example, thinking about adverse childhood experiences and resiliency, thinking about the role that Medicaid can play or telehealth can play in what we want to do next and do more of potentially to support students' behavioral health. Ultimately, we're working to have a unified school behavioral health strategic plan that we've, again, determined and delivered and developed together that really prioritizes strategies and engages the stakeholders and ultimately leads to implementation in a work plan for more of these supports. Next slide. So let me share some early insights from our landscape work on school-based behavioral health. So there are several strengths that we really identified in doing this work together. The first is that certainly we know that child and youth behavioral health is a shared priority. We can see that in increased state support and investments in school mental health, things like learning programs that focus on social and emotional learning. We also have identified many strong partnerships that already exist to address school-based behavioral health throughout the state and at the community. An example here is some of the work that's been ongoing for a while, looking at suicide prevention among children. Also have seen across the board an emphasis on trauma and resiliency in multiple projects. And then these last two are systems that we are very fortunate to have in North Carolina that stakeholders have identified. These are great systems to build upon in this work. So obviously with the schools, you all are very familiar with the multi-tiered system of support. And this is a really phenomenal foundation to build upon for addressing youth mental health in schools. And then on the healthcare side, we have really robust and in many places systems of care programs, which are community-based services and supports to meet the needs of children and families who are involved with multiple systems. And again, this was identified as an existing initiative that would be a great foundation to build upon. Next slide. We've also identified some gaps, and these are, again, some of our early insights. So the first is we really recognize that everyone agreed that there is the need for this landscape, which, like I said, we're quite far along on because that we were not able to identify that there was a central repository of the partners and programs and funding. So that's we're really happy to be working on that together. Also recognize that the limited workforce capacity of behavioral health providers as well as other school staff is certainly an impact. That is, as we think about what's possible and what can be done to really support students' behavioral health prevention, screening, and treatment services. Funding is also another gap that was identified. And while we did see many places where there was great collaboration happening, we also identified for some programs partners that were working more in silos and potentially missing opportunities for collaboration that could really benefit children and families. We also recognize that while telehealth services were really expanded quite quickly during COVID, including sometimes use in schools, there is a lack of clarity, alignment, and really what's the evidence that tells us what we should do next, because that's such a new technology that was so rapidly expanded during COVID. And then also stakeholders identified that the lack of a centralized data source has sometimes made it challenging to track progress or really be able to make as many data-driven decisions as we'd like. So I'll end my remarks today by spotlighting a couple of programs. So the first is a really phenomenal partnership between Department of Public Instruction and Department of Health and Human Services. And this is a project called Project Aware, also known as NC Project Activate. And this is a federally funded, so SAMHSA funded, national program of really coordinated behavioral health initiatives in schools. Focuses on promoting equitable access to quality school-based behavioral health and substance use services. It's a multi-component program, and the local school districts that are participating in this really have the flexibility to choose where do they want to focus that they think is going to really make the most difference for their students and staff in their district. So for example, there's work that can be done around policy development and workforce development or family engagement. There's also work on promotion and prevention, as well as, if a child is identified and, somebody's really worried in the school, say a guidance counselor or principal says, I'm really worried about this young person. Part of the Project Aware funding has been really used to say, okay, we really want to have more clinicians that we want to hire with this funding so that when we identify these young people who are experiencing a behavioral health challenge in school, we can very quickly connect them with a clinician to provide that intervention and treatment that they need. And the staffing is really a nice model for partnership between DPI and DHHS. So the overall program in the state has a co-director, one at DPI and another co-director at DHHS. And then each district level also has its own site director. You can see in the map in the bottom right where these programs are located. And actually, North Carolina was recognized for doing so well with this program that initially we started with 3 sites, which are the yellow stars, and we were invited to expand to additional sites in the purple stars because of the success that we have had in North Carolina with this project and program. Next slide. Another program to spotlight is Youth Mental Health First Aid. DHHS is receiving $5 million of GEAR funding to expand Youth Mental Health First Aid. And this is an evidence-based program that teaches adults who work with young people, including teachers and school staff, how to identify and support young people ages 12 to 18 who are experiencing mental health and substance use challenges, and how to help these young people who are in crisis or emergency situations. The types of topics that mental health first aid covers includes things like, what are the common signs and symptoms of mental health challenges in this age group, and not just, depression or suicidal ideation, also including other things like anxiety, eating disorders, as well as ADHD. Same thing for substance use challenges. And then trains these adults, as well as there's a youth training as well, about how to interact with a child or an adolescent who's experiencing a behavioral health emergency, how to connect that young person with help. There's been also expanded content on trauma, substance use, self-care, and then of course now social media is has a huge impact, as well as bullying, and so those are also included in this training. And then finally, I'll identify that we are also working to build upon the really great model, the whole school, whole community, whole child model, which, as you all likely know, is CDC's framework for addressing health in schools. And when you look at that image on the right of the screen that shows all the components of this model, behavioral, social, emotional health is certainly captured in many of those pieces of that circle. This is a model, as you all know, that's been adopted by the State Board of Education and really emphasizes the types of things that in the work we're doing together to support student behavioral health in schools, very aligned. So wanting to be very student-centered, really focusing on the role of the community in supporting schools and students, thinking about the connections between health and academic achievement, because we know that healthy children learn better. And then also the importance of evidence-based school policies and programs. Next slide, please. So in looking ahead, again, as I mentioned, we together are quite far along in doing our landscape, which we'll continue to update, as well as continuing to update our gap analysis. We are very focused on solutioning now and working towards that unified school behavioral health strategic plan. When we're thinking about implementation, we certainly recognize the urgency of implementing prioritized strategies as soon as possible. And we're also assessing resourcing needs during our landscape gap analysis and solutioning. And then we're always thinking about how can we monitor and measure impact, thinking about the data available so that we can share accountability across all of our partners that, again, we've come together to work on this work now. And we know that continuing to work together and share accountability will be really critical to success, which means success defined as, we're helping and supporting more students so that they are well and thriving. With an emphasis in this work on thinking about how can we better promote equitable access and positive outcomes for students in North Carolina. Thank you so much. I'm happy to take questions if there's time.
Thank you, Dr. Wong. We appreciate the informative presentation and even more your and your team's partnership. Clearly, the objectives of the Department of Health and Human Services and the State Board of Education are aligned through our statements around our strategic plan, our whole child commitment, and our advocacy for more healthcare professionals to assist our students. Any questions or comments? Yes, Mr. Keenan.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a comment. Appreciate that presentation, very informative. As you know, we have been talking about this for a long time, and we're working on that, but for is the non-academic barriers to our children. When I listen to those type conversations or information, it sort of brings it home a little bit because when you experience that with the child, then you understand it better. One thing about mental health, it doesn't discriminate based on color or whatever. Mental health is a problem. And it's unrealistic for us to expect a child to succeed in the way we want them to succeed if we're not providing the necessary resources for them. So I challenge this board, which is doing a good job, to continue. Let's provide the professional the help that the kids need in order to be a good student. Because without our help and others, as been talked about this morning, it takes, as we always say, a village to raise a child. It involves not only us, but it involves community, mental health services, and et cetera. But I just say we have an obligation as human beings, not only as a board member, but to try to help those who need our help. And there's no more help that we give to kids who are crying out for help. And those are the ones that deal with social emotional issues. And I just say again, just challenge the board to continue to do what we can. And as I finish up, I always remember this story my mom told me. She said, "Do you?" I didn't understand what she was saying, but basically what she's saying was, you do what you can do. Don't worry about what John's doing. You do your best. So what I'm saying to this board, do you, and we do our best. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Keenan. Other comments or questions for Dr. Wong? Hearing none, again, Dr. Wong, we thank you for this presentation, for your expertise, and please carry back to your colleagues at DHHS our thanks for the partnership.
Thank you, and we really appreciate the partnership with you all.
Very good. I now turn to our superintendent for the superintendent's report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning to my colleagues on the state board and to our listeners and those who are in the room with us. So I have lots of great news and adventures to share with you this morning. Starting with the next slide, please. Teacher of the Year ceremony recap. So I'm thrilled to say that Leah Carper has been named the 2022 North Carolina Teacher of the Year. It was a pleasure to be at the ceremony and to get to speak at the ceremony with Ms. Floyd and Ms. Stover were there as well, and many DPI folks, and Vice Chair Duncan was with us as well. It was an incredible ceremony, and what I'm really excited to share is that for the first time ever, it was live streamed. And we have Ms. Stover to thank for getting the ball rolling and getting sponsorship for the cost to be covered of that live stream. And then a huge shout out to Blair Rhodes, who always shies away from attention. She's sitting in the gallery today. Blair and Elaine and her team really made sure that the live stream was able to occur, and it viewed across 3 platforms. We had, you can see here, about 1,000 people accessed it on YouTube, on the YouTube channel. And it, we were able to continue to show it after the event. So people who couldn't be there in person or couldn't watch on the day were still able to see it. So about 2,000 people ended up watching it all together across 4 different platforms. So the next slide shows all of our regional toy finalists. They are Ryan Mitchell from Henderson County Public Schools, Ashley Bandy from Newton Conover High School, Ashton Berry from Cabarrus County Schools, Leah Carper, the winner, is from the Piedmont Triad. She is Northern Guilford High School's teacher. From the Sandhills, we have Elizabeth Santamore. She's in Hope County Schools. Mr. Brian Link is Chapel Hill Carbo City Schools. And Clinton Todd is Pitt County Schools. And then we also have the Southeast, Abby Nobles. She is from New Hanover County Schools. And then our charter school winner is from Roxborough Community School, and his name is William Keegan Stores. So really, I've already had a chance to interact with this cohort, and I'm sure, Ms. Floyd, you would agree, they are an amazing group of education professionals. And between this group and our beginning teacher, we have 27 beginning teachers of the year in a cohort, and Xavier was the winner of the beginning teacher of the year. I mean, I told them all, we're gonna make beautiful music together. It's just, I'm really excited about what Ms. Pittman is going to be able to do with this group, and I can't wait to continue to interact with them. So moving on, last month I had a really unique and just incredible opportunity to be a part of a convening at the North Carolina Community College System office with a delegation which included the ambassador to the United States from Botswana. So Ambassador Mokela is a champion of education in his country, and we were able to learn about the history of Botswana, which is a fascinating story of gaining independence from Great Britain in 1966. And the president of Botswana, President Seretse, in 1948, in the midst of the early days of apartheid, married a white woman. And they fell in love because of a love of jazz music, which I just love the story that was told to us. And when he became president in 1966, and she became first lady and gained the respect of the people, and they served together until his last term ended in 1980. And so they were in North Carolina to look at partnerships that they could have with, they have their own innovation hub in Botswana, and they're very interested in Research Triangle Park's innovation hub. They're looking at trying to link their research with ours, they want to start improving education outcomes and literacy rates in their country. They want to help with how to utilize data, best practices around data utilization. And so you can see from the slide that there were folks from, not just from the community college system office, but also from the UNC system. And it was fascinating to have these conversations. And This was actually the day before Dr. Molinitz's accident, so she sat next to me, and we just had a really fascinating conversation. It was such an honor to be a part of that day. So we did 2 different county visits last month. We're going to start with Cabarrus County Schools. We went to Royal Oaks School of the Arts. This is a really special school. It's a Title I school, elementary school with a special emphasis, or actually I think it's K to 8 now that I think about it, that makes arts available to everyone. It's a school of choice within Cabarrus County Public Schools, and we again continue to see high levels of engagement in these districts that we go to. You know, when I often go into these school visits with my teacher coach hat on, because when I was a turnaround coach, you're always going in and looking at what is the level of engagement of the students. And so I'm always drawn immediately to what are the students doing in the classrooms. And we saw so much student-centered work happening in this school. Specifically, if you go to the next slide, we saw a lot of science of reading in action. And you know, when one of the things that's unique about a phonics-based approach to learning to read is that you don't just teach students about syllables. So like the word pony has 2 syllables, and you can remember clapping out syllables, but pony has 3 sounds, or sorry, it has 4 sounds. E, E. And so students tap out those sounds with their fingers, and it's a very kinesthetic activity. And I continue to be amazed at kindergartners I'm seeing reading, 1st, 2nd, 3rd graders who are reading in small groups with their teacher and on their own with software that helps them tap out sounds and clap out syllables. Moving on to Concord High School, this was a really special visit. So we saw about 4 distinct programs at Concord High School. The first program that we got to see is something called JAG, Jobs for America's Graduates. This is a national program that I first became aware of when I worked in the governor's office, and we worked really hard to establish a JAG program through Communities in Schools, that nonprofit organization in our state. This program is really special because it takes the most at-risk students in a high school, the children who are at risk of being lost to the system and to the courts and the justice system forever. And it provides them with a pathway to graduate from high school, to develop social emotional learning skills, and to eventually get a job. And they have a 100% high school graduation rate. It's absolutely incredible. And then something like 85% of those graduates are employed within a year after graduating. And so I got to meet with a cohort of JAG students at Concord High School. All of those of us who were at the visit got to see them practicing interviews. They were doing mock interviews for a job, and then we got to sit with them and ask questions. And so they were learning how to answer questions like, what is your biggest strength? What is your biggest weakness? What would you like to get out of working for this company? So showing these 17 and 18-year-olds how to answer these questions is just amazing. And then I did a Q&A with them, and you all would just not believe the caliber of questions that they asked me. I mean, normally when I offer myself up for questions, it's crickets. And that was not the case with this group. It was really quite amazing. Then we also were treated to a presentation by the IB students who are at this school, the International Baccalaureate Program. And they actually had prepared the whole presentation themselves and talked about the academic rigor of what they are doing in this program and the durable skills that they are learning that they will use at university and beyond. And they were quite an interesting group of students. And we really enjoyed talking to them about why they chose to pursue this very rigorous and difficult program and why they would recommend it to other students. Third, we got to participate in their fire science magnet program. They have a retired fireman who leads this very hands-on program. That's me actually using the fire hose. It took two to help me do it, but I've never done that before. It was really, really fun. But I love this young woman who was part of the program was just so impressive. And anyway, we had a lot of fun learning about real world fire safety programs, and all of the equipment have been donated by a Charlotte fire station, and it was just applied learning at its best. So it was really a pleasure. And then finally, we got to watch the students participate in a real CSI experiment where the teacher had created a crime scene and had all of the pictures, and there was a dead body and a crime to be solved, and we got to have a panel discussion with the students afterwards about what they liked about doing this and whether or not they plan to pursue a career in criminal justice, and how it had kind of changed their thinking about what they might see themselves doing after high school. So, of course, every month I share a now what. How is this going to impact our work moving forward? So we are continuing to see evidence of schools really lifting up their CTE programs and growing their industry partnerships through programs like the fire science as well as the JAG opportunities, and connecting students to multiple post-secondary pathways. And this will, of course, become part of our Promising Practices Network. And you heard yesterday that our own Career Technical Education Department is continuing to comb through its offerings, making sure that they are relevant and actually lead to a real career pathway and a certificate of marketplace value. I also had the chance, moving on to 14 please, I was invited to attend a ribbon cutting for Wake STEM Early College High School. This incredible high school had at one time been a part of State's campus, but they outgrew that space and were able to repurpose an existing space in Wake County and create a space of their own. And this is just a really special place. It has a strong emphasis on first generation college students. They have 100% high school graduation rate, and they really focus on work-based learning and career prep. 99% of their 2021 CTE concentrator grads were placed in college, employment, or military within 6 months of graduating, which of course is what all local superintendents want for their students. They want to be able to say to a student, after they cross that graduation stage, what are you going to do next? I see Mr. Williams nodding vigorously. We don't want students to say, I don't know. We want them to have a plan. So this high school's approach to project-based learning and work-based learning was just absolutely incredible, and 100% of their students will earn a work-based learning experience credit either through an internship or an apprenticeship. And then that's just a picture. Okay, finally, I want to move on to Portrait of a Graduate. So if I could just remind those present that one of the 4 satellites in the department's Operation Polaris strategic plan is testing and accountability. We have been hearing from our educators at all levels across the whole state for years that our current model of accountability, which is an 80% achievement, 20% growth, spitting out a letter grade that defines school, that is supposed to define school quality, is woefully inadequate. I've never met a person who thinks, I've never met a single educator who thinks that that is the system that we should have. And so in thinking about how do we change the testing and accountability model, what do we bring to, because this has to be changed in legislation, how do we decide what determines school quality? We must work backwards and ask ourselves, what do we want students to know and be able to do when they graduate from high school? And the idea that we continue to use seat time as a proxy for preparedness is flawed. We know that because only 31% of our students graduate from high school every year and attain a credential of any kind of value, which includes a 4-year credential and 2-year credentials, by the time they're 24 years old. That's unacceptable, I'm sure you would agree. And so the accountability system drives everything. So we have to change the accountability system if we want to improve outcomes for all students. And with that, we took the advice of many local superintendents who already have a local portrait of a graduate, which is a statement that says this is what we value this is what we expect our students to be able to do. Here are the durable skills and competencies that they should have when they leave us. And so this board approved a contract for us to team up with Battelle for Kids to help coordinate the work across the state. And there have been 4 meetings that have taken place that are where we had regions 1 and 2, regions 3 and 4, 5 and 6, and 7 and 8 participate in virtual meetings. We've had 1,200 participants so far actually log into the meeting and participate in these meetings across 4 meetings. So who were the participants? They were people from communities and schools, the Division of Workforce Solutions in the Department of Commerce, workforce development boards, the State Chamber of Commerce, the Emerging Issues Institute, faith-based networks, Community College System Office, University System Office, My Future NC, and Best NC, amongst others. Also, the Toys and Poise were invited to Teachers of the Year, and Principals of the Year were invited to participate, and elected officials as well. And so the way these meetings are structured is that the folks on the team were asked to think about how has the world changed and what are the implications for our students? What are the competencies students need to thrive today? How can we contextualize those competencies that should be part of a shared vision for our state? And how can we make this portrait of a graduate a reality for every student? In other words, how can it inform our testing and accountability model? And so what the folks in this process determined, and I'm on 20, Lou, I'm sorry. What they determined, they determined that there are 4 major landscape shifts There are workforce shifts, which we've all been privy to. I mean, this started well before the pandemic, but those shifts have been exacerbated by the pandemic. Shifts involving the pace of change due to technology, global shifts, and human interaction shifts. And so the guiding questions were, how important is this? There are 4 shifts. How important is each shift as we consider how to prepare students for their future? And what skills and learning experiences do our students need to be prepared for these shifts? And this is what we learned. So now, yes, that's correct. So what we learned is that there were the people in these groups, the 1,200 people, collectively identified that the main shifts, or the most important shifts, were the pace of change and human interaction. And within those 4 shifts, there are certain subcategories. For example, the service economy, the gig economy, design for meaning, et cetera. And the top scores, you can see the first 5 things were, the highest score was empathy, followed by technology, followed by innovation, followed by civic discourse, followed by the information explosion. How do we train students to deal with the amount of information that is given to them on a day-to-day basis? I find this absolutely fascinating. So now we are preparing for Design Team Meeting 2, which will use that information to identify and align with the competencies and durable skills that North Carolina students need to know. And then we will start looking at ideas for what the finished and final portrait visual will be. And with that, I am finished, Mr. Chair. Thank you so much for the time.
Thank you, Superintendent. Any comments, questions for our Superintendent? Hearing none, I appreciate your report and your advocacy on part of our students and the leadership that you're providing. Thanks so much. Team, we're going to press on and move into our committee reports, and we'll begin with the Student Learning and Achievement Committee, chaired by Ms. Jill Kamnitz. Ms. Kamnitz.
Thank you, Chair Davis. The Student Learning and Achievement Committee started with an item of new business. It was an early literacy update. We learned that the LETRS training in which our teachers are engaged covers theory, modeling, and practice required for effective classroom reading instruction, but research shows that continued coaching beyond the initial professional development is critical for true impact on teacher practice and thus student learning. Ms. Ryan reviewed the structure of the North Carolina coaching support model for both K-5 and pre-K, which will require funding for an additional 9 regional literacy support coaches, 115 district-based early literacy specialists, and a mix of non-recurring and recurring operating expenses. All of these requests will be included in our short session priorities to be discussed and voted on later on today. We then moved to action on first read. SLA 1 was the North Carolina State Board of Education appointments to the Council on Educational Services for Exceptional Children. This council is an advisory council to the State Board of Education, and we are voting today on the appointment of 2 new members, both parents. Ms. Erin Kreitz from the Northeast region, who brings preschool knowledge to the group, and Ms. Tiffany Farrell of the Southwest, who brings knowledge from our Spanish-speaking families. We are also recommending reappointment of the following: Kristen Hodges, Christy Grant, Anthony Baker, and Amy Combs. And for the board to recall that we still have a couple of gaps on that council, both in terms of a special ed teacher and a representative of higher ed. And so Ms. Thomas is happy to receive any suggestions from the board that you may have for those 2 open positions. SLA 2 was the report on the educational and competitive after-school robotics grant. Which I cannot find my notes on. We will be voting to accept this report, which is then shared with the JLEOC. And the purpose of this particular grant is to increase the number of students who demonstrate proficiency in math and science, and to support efforts to increase the number of students pursuing opportunities in science, technology, engineering, and math. A total of $1.6 million will be available to these grants upon application. And right now, that application process is open to our PSUs. And this is for an after-school robotics program, obviously, that will be developed with a partner, a robotics partner. And the timeline for this is that we will be hearing in July the recommendations for the PSUs to receive funds. And those funds will be distributed in August for use during the 22-23 academic year. SLA 3 is Standards Review, Healthful Living K-12, and Science K-12. It's time to begin the standards review and revision process in these two content areas, and the department will be using the internal procedures manual that the board recently approved. Neither of these content areas have been revised since 2010, so this work is way overdue, and our recommendation today is to vote for approval of the request to begin the process. We then had some discussion items. SLA 4 was a report from the State Advisory Council on Indian Education. SACE, which is the acronym for this particular council, is a valuable advisory partner to our board, and this was their annual report. Each year they provide us with lots of data on academic, graduation, dropout rates, and other comparative performance of American Indian students. We learned that there are still serious disparities in the achievement of that particular group compared to the rest of the student population, so we have much work to do there. Often SACE brings us several recommendations, but this year they brought us only one, which was to ask for the state board to support all efforts to establish and secure a DPI position dedicated to American Indian educational services and the enactment of provisions that have been recommended previously. And that particular recommendation will be found in our short session priorities. SLA 5 is a proposed new State Board of Education policy local testing report. The general statutes require that local boards of education notify the state board of their local testing requirements each year. The requirement can be waived if the local board has made significant progress towards reducing local testing compared to the state average. This policy change defines significant progress as reducing testing within one standard deviation above the state's 2-year average for the number of tests or the number of hours. So that will be a policy change that we'll be voting on today. SLA 6 is the 2023-24 Career and Technical Education Course Inventory and Essential Standards. CTE reviews and revises their course standards every 5 years or more often if necessary, due to the technical nature of the content and the rate of change in some industries, as Superintendent just discussed in terms of the profile of the graduate. The changes being recommended are voted on today to both middle school and high school courses include 5 AP course descriptions that will be added, 6 course updates, 9 courses becoming inactive, and 1 new course in the Adobe pathway. And finally, we have 1 consent item, SLA 7, which is a State Board of Education policy amendment, English learners' participation in the statewide testing program. This is a proposed amendment to policy test 011, changing the name of the WAP-T test to the WIDA Science for Kindergarten. This test is used to determine if a kindergarten student qualifies for services as an English language learner. And that is the conclusion of my committee report today.
Thank you, Ms. Kamnitz. Any questions for Ms. Kamnitz on the SLA committee report? Yes, ma'am.
So, Ms. Kamnitz, yesterday during the discussion about the early literacy update that Ms. Ryan had shared, I was trying to understand all of those pieces, and after some conversation with her, I just want to clarify that the one, I just want to lift up one that looking at the school district, regional, and state level supports, I think we're moving in the right direction with that. My question, just for clarification, is at the school level, we have school-based literacy specialists, but they are current staff at the school level, and we're looking to hire at the district level. Correct? Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. With that being said, when I appreciate our efforts to look at sustainability, but what I'm concerned about that we haven't thought is everyone's context is different. If I just use my school as an example, I'm in a small school district in a small school, and the person that I would assign this role, this very important role too, would be my instructional coach. However, my instructional coach, who's one of the best that I've ever worked with, is also our MTSS coordinator. She works as like a lead instructional coach person for our district, so she's spending a lot of time helping at, with the district level stuff because we don't have the curriculum specialist there. She's also working directly with students with interventions, and the little coaching that she is doing now is very specific to our highest need teachers. So beginning teachers that are working on classroom management or those foundational pieces. And so I'm just really concerned at how does she best take on this role to support students or support teachers in early literacy with all of those other big rocks on her plate. And so that brings me to an equity issue. If we're looking at just one per district and not really thinking about what are the school supports that we have, that's where the real change is going to happen. That's where the impact, because if anyone's ever been a coach, it's an everyday, ongoing, in the classroom, co-teaching, sitting down, looking at student data, figuring out how you're going to plan your intervention or what that next lesson is going to be. And one person at a district with multiple schools and maybe schools with low-performing schools, is that adequate? And I know if we're pushing and moving forward to do this work, I want to make sure that our intent is going to get us the outcomes that we want.
Ms. Hammond?
Yes.
Oh, so I want to make sure that I think we may have an inaccuracy here,
Okay.
but it could be me. So, the 115 coaches, that's what you're asking about, right?
I'm asking about all of it. I did ask clarification about the 115, which is going to be at the district level, and
No, they're
It's
going
not.
to be employed by DPI.
But they'll be working in.
But they
They'll be
will
working
be-
at the district level, but they will take the burden off of your instructional coach for the early literacy piece. Because your instructional coach, the 115 early literacy coaches will be letter certified trainers.
yes.
So they will take the responsibility off of your early literacy coach, who, as I mentioned yesterday, a lot of our early literacy coaches are doing exactly what you just described. They're doing 5 different things. They could be working on math, they could be working with new teachers. And so what the research shows is that in order for the Science of Reading initiative that's in place through legislation to be sustainable and to be impactful, there must be a person in each district who is ensuring that the K-5 teachers or K-3 teachers really have what they need to implement with fidelity. So they will be DPI employees deployed to every district.
Yes, okay, so that makes sense. It still didn't quite get to my question, because even if the DPI employee that are out in districts working at schools, coaching is an everyday in the classroom. So one person is going to be able to co-teach, to model for 60, and I'm in a small district, say 60 K2, K3 teachers on a regular everyday basis. I can't
So there,
figure
so
out how that would
those,
happen.
yeah, so the the coaches that will be DPI employees, they're not classroom coaches, they're teacher coaches. So I guess I think what I hear you saying is that you need more classroom instructional coaches.
It would be great if I was making a recommendation that we have school-based early literacy coach for every school
Right,
versus
and
one per
that's
district.
so that would cost
Yes.
$135 million.
Yeah, I know she mentioned
Yeah,
that.
yeah, and so we can't, again, we're scaling, I think eventually we might get there, but we are, this is all an implementation science and we have to scale at the rate that we can scale.
And I definitely understand that when we make that recommendation, just so that we know that you do have the one person with lots of teachers that are gonna need more support than a whole group. You know, they're gonna need somebody in the classroom. They're gonna need some coaching, they're gonna need modeling, co-teaching, all of that good stuff, looking at data. And so I'm still concerned that one person per district is gonna be able to do that work with all the K-3 teachers in the district.
So,
Thank you.
I don't disagree with anything you're saying, and I would just, ask you to recall that, teachers will get coaching from the letters, from the Lexia learning people. They will be in the classroom with the teachers, but not forever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And there will be an ability for the literacy coaches to focus on schools of highest need within the district as well. I mean, that's
our plan.
part of the discussion yesterday about how they will affect what's happening in chronically low performing schools.
That's right.
So some focus there as well.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay,
So duly noted.
Thank you, Ms. Clemens. Any other questions for Ms. Kamens? Hearing none, we'll move to our next committee report, which is the Education, Innovation, and Charter Schools Committee, led by Ms. Amy White. Ms. White.
Good morning, Chair Davis. I'm just checking for good audio.
Yes, we can hear you great.
Wonderful. Good morning, everyone. I'm Amy White, and I chair the Education, Innovation, and Charter School Committee, along with my colleague, Jill Kamnitz. We have several items that we covered yesterday during committee. EICS 1 is our recommendation to the full board about an appeal from Torchlight Academy. Yesterday, colleagues, I summarized for you that and reminded you that back in March, the state board voted to terminate the charter of Northeast Raleigh Charter Academy doing business as Torchlight Academy. Torchlight, in lieu of having a hearing panel, asked for an opportunity to present evidence of subsequent remedial measures taken and requests that the EICS committee recommend to the state board that it actually vote to keep the school open. So on April the 27th, a committee comprised of Ms. Jill Kamnitz, Mr. Wendell Hall, and myself had an opportunity to hear from Torchlight representatives as they discussed measures taken by the school to rectify the problems previously identified by the state board back in March. It was their hope that we would allow them to stay open for the next calendar year. After hearing all of the information presented and asking questions, great dialogue back and forth, the members of the committee voted unanimously to recommend to the state board that it uphold its prior termination decision, but we did vote to allow the charter termination to conclude at June 30th, 2022. And we did that because of the following reasons. We had ongoing concerns with current and future financial health of the school. We had continued concerns with the school board's ability to provide the oversight and leadership necessary to correct the school's contractual, educational, and fiscal mismanagement. And we had ongoing significant concerns with the school's ability to meet and serve the needs of exceptional children for both compensatory education and daily instructional delivery. The committee deliberated significantly about whether to close the school immediately and came to the conclusion that because Dr. Randy Bridges had assumed temporary leadership of the school, that DPI would be able to work with the school in the coming month to minimize the disruption to the students here at the end of the year, where testing would be critical and consistency of delivery. And we felt like Dr. Randy Bridges would be able to provide that security. And we voted to allow them to continue through the end of the year and to to close at the end of the fiscal year, June 30th, 22. The committee recognizes, affirms, and offers its sincere gratitude for Dr. Bridges for his leadership in assisting the school and finishing out the school year. So we're asking for approval of that today. EICS 2 was a request from the School of the Arts for Boys Academy to revise its grade level projections. Because of the families that applied, it became evident that a sixth grade was going to become necessary. So they came before us with a request which was approved by CSAB to add sixth grade for the coming year. EICS 3 was Chatham Charter's request to implement a national school lunch program. As we discussed yesterday, this is an excellent partnership between an existing school district and a charter school to be able to offer the opportunity for a school lunch program to students that go to Chatham Charter. Then we had several discussion items. Ms. Ashley Beccaro did an amazing job compiling information along with her team for the 2021 Charter Schools Annual Report, which appears on our agenda as EICS 4. There were lots of detailed information shared from demographics. Of course, academic performance because of COVID is not available, but a lot of information shared during that report. I do encourage my colleagues to study that, and please reach out to Ms. Beccaro if you have questions before the next board meeting. Following that report for the charter schools, we moved to EICS 5, and we had a great discussion on a merger and mission amendment request from Triad Math and Science Academy. Triad Math and Science Academy is basically going to collapse under one umbrella with one board. They displayed strong fiscal decision-making when they put into this request that they allow each individual school to be audited separately, as well as the central office that would receive 5% of the funds in order to operate, but all operating under one board. This is a discussion item. Again, there are a wealth of materials, particularly some information that sort of details and highlights the request on eBoard for you to review over the next month. EICS 6 is a request from Old Mainstream Academy. They are in Robeson County, a new charter school, and they are going to implement a weighted lottery in an attempt to move their economically disadvantaged student population from about 28% to a goal of 35%. EICS 7 is Oak Hill Charter School's request to increase its enrollment. It's in a smaller county surrounded by several other smaller counties, and they had a huge opportunity to serve more kindergarteners. So they're before us with a request to add 24 more kindergarten students. EICS 8, North Oak Academy, is before us with a request and a second delay. It was shared during yesterday's committee that North Oak Academy is before us for this request because they have had a difficult time receiving utility improvement from the County of Durham, City of Durham, for water and sewer, and because of a law passed by the General Assembly, they are currently in legislation and hoping to have that resolved this summer and should be able to proceed with the upfit of purchase of the land and upfit of their facility. So they're before us for a second delay. And then finally, EICS 9 is Revitalize, came before CSAB with a request to decrease their enrollment. CSAB heard the request and decided that because Revitalize is and was an accelerated application, and they put forth a number that they felt like that they could meet and attain, that they needed to actually meet and attain the number of students. So CSAB is requesting that we deny this request to decrease enrollment and hold their feet to the fire and hope that they can get the number of students that they need in order to open on time. So, Mr. Chair, we don't have any consent items this month, and that concludes the report for the Education, Innovation, and Charter School Committee. Are there any questions?
Any questions for Ms. White? Hearing none, thank you so much, Ms. White. We'll now proceed to the Healthy Responsible Students Committee led by...
Mr. Chair.
Excuse me?
Mr. Chair. Treasurer Falwell, I apologize.
Mr. Treasurer?
Thank you, sir. Can I ask you to direct somebody on staff regarding the Torchlight to make sure that there's an email communication with the treasurer's office regarding their issues regarding their pension plan payments and their state health plan payments, just to make sure that the employees who are connected with these systems are not left in the dark.
Yes, Treasurer, I'm aware that our staff is already engaged in that matter, and we'll make sure that it comes to a conclusion as you requested.
Thank you very much, sir.
Yes, sir. Now we'll move to the Healthy Responsible Students Committee, led by my colleague, Mr. Reginald Keenan. Mr. Keenan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, Sportsman Reginald Keenan and my co-chair, Mr. Alan Duncan. Mr. Chair, due to my technological issues yesterday, I've deferred to my partner to carry on, because I couldn't hear, it was in and out, so I'd rather Mr. Duncan has to be carry on what went on yesterday.
As you wish.
Thank you, Chair Keenan. The first item was HRS 1, and I think this was an interesting and important item that came before the board with respect to statutory language that was passed during the previous session, which was in a total amount of $150 million focused on both lead and asbestos remediation and testing in public school units and child care facilities. Dr. Robert Taylor, our Deputy Superintendent for Student and School Advancement, introduced this item and the issues. Kim Lawson, our Section Chief in Plant Operations, gave us some details about how this work would be carried out and has indicated a deep knowledge on the part of our staff here, and obviously a lot of coordination that's already gone on in past years in the various school PSUs around the state. And finally, Brandon Walker from the Office of General Counsel for the State Board of Education reported on the rules, which is what's actually before us. So to go back a little bit, the $150 million is divided in two ways in the statutory language. $33 million approximately for testing, with a focus first and foremost on testing for lead in water, the drinking water specifically. The main areas of focus for that are in drinking fountains and in kitchen-related areas. Obviously, in addition to that, in the event that there's a pipe that serves as a main pipe in some way, then the school, that also will have to be reviewed. But if there are lead content at unacceptable levels, that would be revealed through the testing that necessarily needs to go on with the drinking water within the school. There is some testing we believe traditionally been done by health departments around the state in this area. So the belief is on the part of the department that at least there will be some data as a starting point. That's the first and foremost area, and the effort right now, the ongoing point of effort is some negotiations at how to get testing with fidelity and consistency from around the state. And that testing protocol is one that it is important that it's followed carefully so that you don't get false reports or false negatives back. The next stage after that will be looking at remediation, first for lead in the water, and then remediation with respect to any lead paint and any asbestos remediation that's required in order to assure safety in our schools for our students. There was a good deal of conversation yesterday. There's a match involved in that when you get to remediation, where the district would pay $1 for every $1 paid by the district for such remediation. $2 would be paid from the statutory authorized language from federal funds. There is, again, a good deal of data that exists with respect to both lead paint from our health departments and asbestos remediation that's already occurred all around the state in many, many buildings in our schools. There's a report that needs to be filed statewide every 3 years with respect to asbestos abatement. It's done by outside professionals. So the good news is we're not starting from scratch in terms of gathering an enormous amount of data. There is from past reporting, and obviously these are issues that have been of concern to the department and to local school districts for a long time. So that sort of gives you the big picture. Back to the fairly, and we will be back. There are a number of complicated issues I think that we touched on yesterday that will need to be dealt with as this program goes forward. But the more discrete issue for the board to decide, and the motion that's before the board today, is to give adoption and approval of the temporary rules that have already been passed by the Rules Commission. By statute, DHHS, our partner in many things, was designated as the lead agency for this. So DHHS, in some collaboration with, I know Tom Zyko worked with some of their attorneys with respect to these rules. Temporary rules were implemented and put in place. They'll have to be followed up with permanent rules, but those were put in place with respect to how to move forward with the various parts of this remediation effort, starting with the testing. So there will be additional rules undoubtedly that will come back. In addition, there undoubtedly will be some revisions when we get to permanent rules as we continue that rules process. But we've been asked to adopt and approve of the rules that have already been passed that were put forward by DHHS. It's felt like because it applies to both agencies, that is the child care facilities for DHHS and the public school units for the schools, that type of collaboration on the rules is important, as well as obviously collaboration on the work itself. So that is the specific issue that will be before us for vote later this morning. Our second item, HRS 2, was a State Board of Education policy amendments to amend the Whole Child North Carolina policy. Those had not been updated for some period of time. Dr. Christy Day was here yesterday for any further questions. She had appeared in our meeting in April and provided a detailed report about the changes that were made or proposed for this policy amendment. And those are now ready to go forward for vote at our meeting.
Any questions for Mr. Keenan and Mr. Duncan on the Healthy Responsible Students Committee? Hearing none, we'll proceed to the Educator Standards and Practice Committee, led by Dr. Olivia Oxendine. Dr. Oxendine.
Thank you, Chair Davis. I am Olivia Oxendine, and I chair this committee. And joining me in that responsibility is Ms. Amy White. Before I go into my summary of my items, I do want to call attention to my use of POW yesterday. I do have, that was intentional, because it stands for Perfectly Outstanding Women.
Nicely done.
Good recovery.
Miss Floyd, listen, I'm serious. That's exactly what Miss Floyd, Miss Clemens, and Dr. Ashburn, perfectly outstanding women, POW. And I may use it again. So, on to business. All items are discussion, and they will, both will come back. Two will come back, I know, very soon. Well, three will come back very soon. Number one is ES&P 1, and this is to revise the licensure requirements for school administrators. And that's a very important item. What I did yesterday was summarize the 4 recommendations that Mr. Tabari Wallace brought to the State Board last month, and those 4 recommendations are a synthesis of the recommendations that have come over time from our stakeholder groups. Mr. Blackburn, I must apologize because I ran through a lot of acronyms yesterday in this particular item, and they're all spelled out for you in the discussion section of this item on our summary page. So they're all there. Pepsi, INCACTI, it's fully spelled out for the Teacher Recruitment and Retention Committee, but you can find the acronym spelled in the discussion item. I thought about that last night. That was an oversight.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will read those and get up to speed on the acronyms.
I'm sure you already are. So anyway, that is what we're gonna do with those recommendations is continue to refine and work on them and probably bring our stakeholders back to the table again, get them in really good form so that we will be satisfied with these recommendations once they become, and eventually they will become state law. So we want to send over to the General Assembly well-crafted recommendations, because eventually, once they become general statute in 115C, our EPPs and our school districts will have to comply with that law. So we need to give some more time for those recommendations, and we will. The next item is ES&P 2. This is the educator preparation the recognition and approval of the North Carolina Community College system. We're so delighted to be engaged in conversations with the leadership and the council over at the Department of Community Colleges, because the opportunity to add 58 campuses to our EPP portfolio, and these would be campuses eventually would come to before the state board for approval to prepare and license teachers, and to have an additional 58, possible 58 added to that portfolio not only is it significant, it's pretty creative. So we're looking forward to ongoing conversations around that particular topic, and it will be coming back to us probably within the next couple of months. I know the framework that the campuses will use to apply for authorization will be approved by the board probably next month, if maybe discussed next month and approved in July, but it will be coming our way for us to review the application framework. The next item is the ES&P 3, the policy amendment to the this comes, it belongs in the category in our, I suppose, our codes, administrative codes, Advisory-007, the North Carolina Driver Education Advisory Committee, membership requirements and update, and this was presented to us by Mr. Carl Logan, who is the director of that division. And just by way of highlights of what Mr. Logan brought before us, it is a 19-member committee, and one of the items that he wants us to approve that Mr. Logan brought to us for approval next month is to exclude members representing key stakeholder groups from the term limit policy, because those stakeholders bring special expertise to the work of this Driver Education Advisory Committee. We also want to welcome to DEAC, which is the advisory committee, Driver Ed Advisory Committee. We want to welcome the Child Fatality Task Force as a new member to that group. And Mr. Logan reminded us of the mission of this advisory committee. He also linked that mission to 3 goals that are part of the State Board of Education strategic plan. Goal number 1 is to eliminate opportunity gaps by 2025. Goal 2 is to improve school and district performance by 2025. And goal 3, to expand culturally relevant, equity-focused resources for schools. So it also of note to me was the fact that the work of the Driver Education Task Force does certainly resonate with the standards, curricula, and programs of our public school system in the area of dropout prevention, student conduct and wellness, and essential skills for young adults. I want to thank everyone here at DPI who contributed to ES&P for this May meeting. It's always an honor to work with you. You work hard every day to make this board meeting possible. Thank you, Chair Davis.
Thank you, Dr. Oxendine. Any questions for Dr. Oxendine? Seeing none, we'll proceed to the Government and Community Affairs Committee report, and that committee is chaired by Mr. Wendell Hall. Mr. Hall.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Once again, my report will probably pale in comparison to this POW sitting to my right, and to those to my left and those in this room. These powerful women that is assembled in this room today. Thank you, Dr. Oxendine, for reminding me of what really that acronym meant. Well said and well stated. It's my honor and pleasure this morning to present to the board, the committee's report that was shared yesterday. I do that along with Ms. Jill Kamitz, is my vice chair, our vice chair of the committee. We started yesterday in hearing from Mr. Falkenberry concerning the short-term ask list from the General Assembly coming from the State Board. I need to say up front, as I said yesterday, the committee is in full support of the ask coming from the Department of Public Instruction. I don't need to go over those. If I do, I will gladly outline some of those items of interest. But we had it and was put up yesterday, but if you have any questions, some items that will be presented to you to vote on from the DPI side would be the standards of curriculum, dealing with 2 additional support personnel for the Office of Charter Schools, and our psychologist intern program that we're internship program that we are looking at also. Those are just a few of those items. And by the way, recurring funds is what we are seeking and asking for we know that this is not going to be a short trip. It's going to be a long trip. So we need these funds in place for these different programs to support the children of this great state that we heard about from the health department earlier this morning. Along with the presentation by Mr. Falkenberry, the committee would like to add 2 additional items to that report, which deals with our school social workers and asking for 115 positions there. To go along with the academic side, we want to also enhance and include the emotional learning side, the mental health side of developing this total child that we're all concerned about. So we'll be asking that be added to the list, along with our transformation team members dealing with our low-performing schools, our schools that are chronically low-performing, and asking for an additional 51 positions to go along to round out the fact that now we will be able to cover all of those low-performing schools with some additional support academically. And I heard eloquently spoken by my coworker about the need for classroom, getting in those classrooms and delivering services to those individual teachers and whatnot. And I think the state superintendent said it also, that, you know, we have to start somewhere as we move up. And I come from a perspective of these are uncharted waters. We've never been in this situation. And we're trying to find our way through these rough waters to get to that place that where these kids can walk out of school and be prepared for a job, whatever that job might be. So we're asking for additional 51 turnaround, additional, and 115 social workers to go along with the ask list that's being presented. Hopefully you will approve that request coming from the Governmental Assistance Committee, Community Affairs Committee. But I also have to point out the fact that yesterday we heard from Ms. Pittman, her visits to 5 different schools, that exemplifies what we're all about. And that's exciting. We also heard yesterday from Mr. Wallace, brought in a group from Park Hill, I think it was Park Hill, Parkland High School? Hopewell. You know, when they said 1,800 students at one site, and I sat and I listened on one site, and what could be multiple campus sites. There aren't 1,800 students in my entire school system. But for 1,800 students at one site, and what those parents did, not what we did, not what we paid for, but out of the kindness and goodness of their heart, we heard parents talking yesterday about moms and dads helping school educate their children. And of course, they drove 3 hours to get here. That within itself said to me that they were committed. And I'm so thankful. I see Mr. Wallace at the back. I have talked with him on numerous occasions about bringing those diamonds to this committee so we can hear that things are going on. But what happened there to me was parents and the school system joined hands. And I know there was more to it than what we saw yesterday, because we was on a time frame. But those are the type of practices, and I think, colleague Ford, you have a term for that. Is it diamonds?
Pockets of promise.
Pockets of promise. And that's what we're all about also. It's out there. If you have any questions about it, please ask. We were also notified yesterday that the website is up now, the interactive website, to where someone can go there and click on it. And it'll pop up with this information about these promises of hope that we have out here in our schools system that's helping our children. That would be the committee's recommendation, Mr. Chairman. But also, if I can at this point in time, will you allow me to add one other statement to this committee's work? And this statement is, the State Board of Education calls on the General Assembly and the governor to work together to fully fund the comprehensive remediation plan for year 3. And year 3 being 2022-2023. I would like for that to be added to the committee's report for action later on this morning.
Thank you,
And that's our report. Any questions or concerns, please bring them forward.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. Any questions for Mr. Hall on the Government and Community Affairs Committee report?
Chair Davis, this is Amy White.
Ms. White?
I just wanted to bring attention to the fact that today I'm going to vote in favor of the committee's recommendations. However, there is one point of dissent for me, and it does circle back to the comments that I made yesterday during the state board meeting regarding additional funding for social workers. While I strongly support and acknowledge the need for social workers, yesterday in my comments, I was suggesting that we delay that request until the long session. So it'll be a yes vote for me today, with an important note that I dissent on the idea of asking for more money, since there are additional unused funds right now that could be unrecurring, Chair Hall, that could be used so that we could see the impact of the 300 that we've already hired, and then make a concentrated request in the long session. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. White. That'll be noted in our minutes. Any other comments?
Thank you so much.
Questions for Mr. Hall? Hearing none, we'll move to our final committee report of the day, which is business operations, led by Vice Chair Duncan. Duncan.
Thank you, Chair Davis. Along with Wendell Hall, we lead the Business Operations Committee. We had several items before the board yesterday. A new business, Ms. Alexa Schaus gave us a report on the bonuses to qualifying teachers and instructional support personnel. The status of that, you'll recall, this stems from the $100 million that was allocated out of the ESSER 3 funds by the General Assembly to be paid as teacher bonuses. That money turned out to ultimately be more than that. The final report we received was almost $8 million. And the first, by statute, the first items that would go to make up for any overage come from any underuse of any specific designations that the General Assembly had made in its statutory work with respect to the ESSER 3 funds. And so that funding, which is approximately $9.3 million, will take up a lot of the overage. There'll still be approximately $3.5 million that will need to be borne by the districts out of other ESSER 3 funds they would have received with respect to the teacher bonuses at this point. So it was important that we close the loop, if you will, on that report, and that was the purpose of this new business report. And we thank Ms. Schaus for the very clear explanation she gave and provided the various sources of where the funds are coming from. We had 3 actions on first reading. The first one, we did have 3 actions on first reading. The first one was Biz Op 1, which is approval of contracts over $500,000. And we had 3 presenters on this item. The first presenter was Dan Tetro from the Office of Early Learning. And he reported on the teaching strategies contract and the letters of training contract, which is now Voyager Sopris Learning, Inc., based on some business combinations. That's the new name of the entity. But that's a continuation of the letters contract that we're already as part of, and teaching strategies also continues efforts that are already underway with respect to the assessments of incoming kindergarten students. And so that's been something that's been done for a long time and continues to need to be done. Dr. Rob Dietrich reported as Director of Digital Teaching and Learning on 3 contracts, all of which are continuations of existing contracts: SchoolNet, Britannica, and EBSCO. He described what each of these do, and it was a good question to ask what EBSCO is, because it's a classic, we've got the acronym for EBSCO, but what exactly is EBSCO? And Dr. Dietrich did a fine job of explaining what the source material available through EBSCO is and what its uses are. So those are 3 contracts that again represent continuations of past contracts that are part of the fabric, if you will, of the programs available to our students and districts. Finally, Ms. Tracy Tillis, who's the IT Manager for Student Information Systems, reported on the ECATS contract, which will allow for continuation of that contract, and also add to it some features that appear to be necessary based on ongoing experience with ECATS. I think ECATS has been invaluable to the Exceptional Children's Division, and I think that it's been an extremely important resource for their work. It's been an extremely important resource for the districts as well, so it is an important thing. I'm going to circle back for one thing on the letters training contract. That also represented a slight extension on the time of the contract. That was worth, there's a slight increase for that. But it's an extension that makes a lot of sense. It's extended for approximately 3 months in order to end in conjunction with the ending date, September 30, 2024, for the funding through the ESSER III funds. So that's the last part of that contract in terms of what the makeup of that contract is. BizOp 2 is ESSER III budget considerations, use of administration funds. Ms. Joyce Monroe presented that and set out where the different funds are going. Importantly, is tying to other discussions the board has had during this meeting, 6 additional positions be authorized through ESSER III funds, again, all federal funding, good until September 30th of 2024, but 6 additional positions are set out from that additional administrative funding for the purpose of the transformation district work that's undergoing and ongoing, and will be part of the expansion of that work. BizOp 3 is the legislative report on supplemental funds for teacher compensation. This is a report that's required by the legislature with respect to the supplemental funds that were voted for 95 of the 100 counties by the legislature during this past session, and there's a required report that goes with that. Thank you. To report on these items. So that ends our items for action, and we then had a discussion item, which is State Board Policy Amendment to North Carolina Public School Allotment relating to a school transportation policy update. Mr. Kevin Harrison presented and went through basically 2 items. Where are we going into next year with the status of events during the past year? There's been a real effect in a number of different ways on transportation costs. There's been change in ridership in some districts, not so much in others. There's also been a change in the price of fuel significantly in the latter part of the school year. There's also been, as part of the overall equation that the transportation departments around the state have had to deal with, there's been a shortage of bus drivers and efforts to try to make sure those positions are filled, and we should stop and say thank you to many people who stepped up to help fill those positions, and many people who are double tasking, if you will, who are school employees who are assisting with the bus transportation issues. It's been an extraordinarily challenging year. So there's a report given as how we try to look at next year, and the essence of the thought process is that there will be a floor of 90%. So even if a district suffered significant losses from bus ridership this year, the thought is that will change and improve in the coming year. And so don't want to have a floor going below 90%. Also, however, there were some districts who had the same ridership or maybe even a little above the ridership. And so to the extent the traditional formula would be helpful to them, we want to make sure those districts are dealt with fairly and appropriately. This will also give some time to try to assess the formula as we go forward in the post-pandemic, what we all hope to be the post-pandemic era. This will give a year of transition to be able to do some assessment as we look at what the landscape is as going forward. Two other aspects that were reported on had to do with the cost of fuel. So looking again to next year's budget, this came out of the Government Affairs Committee's report. Mr. Falkenberry reported that a suggested approach will be to have a request for $35 million in reserve funding in the event we encounter the emergency that we envision we may well be encountering, given where we are right now with diesel gas prices. So that's trying to be good partners with the General Assembly and try to work together and continue to assess this situation while also being supportive of our districts who will need this kind of support with these very dramatic and drastic changes in gas prices. So that's the ongoing approach. The look back approaches, we've now heard from over 70 of our counties with respect to what the situation has been for them, with actual receipts being requested for gas charges and costs in terms of how this has adversely impacted them and to what extent it's adversely impacted them. Certain qualifications have been put in place both for the new formula plan for next year and for this plan right now to make sure that any additional money that's provided would be solely for the overrun in costs for diesel gas. And that's one of the reasons the survey asked for appropriate documentation in terms of what the costs are. That plan is now in place. We've received already over $5.5 million in overcharges that are not otherwise accounted for. The department is able to look at close to $4.7 million in reserves, and the department is further looking for other potential funds in order to try to reimburse these costs. Keep in mind the overage that's been reported is not from all 100 counties yet. Also, it's only through mid to late April, and there's still, of course, another month to go in May, so the charges, that number's not going to get lower, it's going to be higher as we get through the rest of this school year. So we want to try to do everything we can to assist the local districts as best we can. To the extent we're unable to cover all of that, and I think a reasonable and honest forecast would be to say we likely are unable to cover all of that, the districts will be in a position where they will have to bear the difference that we're not able to make up. And that will be a hardship on some districts, and we should recognize that up front. There are some districts that will not be easy. I can think of some districts that, from a financial standpoint, they're tested on an annual basis, and they're large counties who have very long bus routes. And as a result of that, you spend a lot of money on fuel. So this is going to be very challenging, and I think we need to continue to monitor this situation for those districts for the rest of this year and be mindful as we go into next year how to best support them. And I appreciate the work that's being done by the facilities department in this area. We have two consent items. Biz Op 6 is certification of financial officers, which we're very happy to be certifying financial officers as much as we possibly can. Anyone with qualifications who has a yearning desire to become a financial officer in our schools, we applaud you. We thank you for that interest, and we want to accommodate that interest as best we can. Very much would welcome people who have an interest in helping our districts and doing good work. Biz Op 7 is a report required annually from the legislature on supplanting low wealth supplemental funds and small school system supplemental funds, and the report is quick and a good, which is nobody supplanted any such funds, and so very, very positive, quick report on that. We had the updates on contracts that everyone was able to look at. With respect to the monthly budget report, Ms. Schaus presented us with the copy of the annual budget report for the department and gave us a quick overview of how valuable it is, not just to us, but obviously even to their staff and to others in government. So that was a very helpful overview and a good reminder of what an important document that is in terms of our system. As I close, I do want to say thank you to the departments that they're working so hard. That business operations is generally regarded as the most boring thing we have. I recognize that. But in fact, it's extremely important, and we have people who have been impacted. Business operations is impacted heavily by the pandemic, just as all other parts of education are. And we have people who have worked extraordinarily hard throughout this time period in order to try to make sure services continue to go forward, that we try to be fair in how we allocate under circumstances that have never been seen before. So I want to express a deep thanks to the people who have been so important, both at the local level and here in the department. And to that, I necessarily have to add thank you to all our classified employees, all our bus drivers, all the people who work in our staff, all the people our teacher assistants, our cafeteria workers, that they have done fabulous, incredible work. They've been part of business operations for the last 2.5 years, whether they wanted to be or not, and they've been extraordinary in so many different ways. And I shouldn't stop having gone that far without thanking our educators and our principals for the extraordinary work that we do, that they do. We cannot lift them up enough. We cannot praise them enough. We cannot say thank you to them enough. And I hope that we will adopt a view as a state that it is our responsibility to acknowledge the professionalism and the stature that they hold, because in fact, they deal with the most important resources the state has or ever will have, our children. So I want to lift up all of them for the incredible work they do and to thank them for the selfless approach so many of them have taken in helping our children. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Duncan. Any questions for Mr. Duncan? We will now take a 10-minute break before we enter our final phase of our agenda, so let's plan to reconvene at 11:05. 11:05. Well said. Not enough.
As chair, vice chair Duncan said, it should be TICO.
I don't care what they say about it. right, we're back in session and headed down the home stretch. Our last item for consideration is 3 items under the chair's report. The first of 2 action on first reading items deals with our district in Northampton County. As many of you recall, about 6 months ago, this board took the unusual step, but necessary step, of installing an interim superintendent to lead that district in its transformation efforts. And I want to commend first the DPI assistance team that's doing great work in Northampton County, along with Dr. Dale Burns, the superintendent that we installed in Northampton, that is leading the necessary changes for the benefit of the students, teachers, and families in Northampton County. We now have an item before us that Dr. Burns has brought to us, and I'll turn to my colleague, Ms. Amy White, to introduce that item and make a motion. Ms. White.
Thank you so much, Chair Davis. Because of the Department of Public Instruction's assuming of leadership and the appointment of Dr. Dale Burns as superintendent, and upon his recommendation, I do have a motion today that I would like for the board to consider. And the motion is as follows. I move that the State Board of Education remove from the Northampton County Board of Education the authority to continue with the Restart School Improvement Model after June 30th, 2022, upon a finding by this state board that this action is absolutely necessary to ensure the financial solvency of the Northampton County schools, and that the state board has appointed an interim superintendent to manage the district, and that the district has been provided with a CARES state assistance team as an alternative support for its continuing work to improve its low-performing status. Mr. Chair, I make a motion that this be approved.
Thank you. Motion by Ms. White. Is there a second? Second by Mr. Keenan. So any discussion? So this item now moves to our action agenda, which we'll take up in just a few moments. So thank you, Ms. White. Our second action on first read under the chair's report deals with a foreclosed charter school named Bridges Academy. In late April, the Office of the State Auditor released an investigative report regarding Bridges Academy, and OSA found that in the 2021 school year, Bridges Academy falsified student enrollment records to obtain $404,971 in state funding and misused $78,576 of charter school funding to support a preschool. A receiver has been appointed. That school is now closed. A receiver has been appointed to oversee the orderly liquidation of Bridges Academy's assets, and the deadline for the Department of Public Instruction to submit a proof of claim against that estate is May 31st, 2022. Upon advice of our counsel, now seek a motion to this effect. Vice Chair Duncan.
Thank you, Chair Davis. I move that a proof of claim be submitted by our attorneys on behalf of the State Board of Education against the estate of Bridges Academy pursuant to the Office of State Auditor's findings in the amount of $483,547, while reserving the right to potentially pursue future claims based on the school and administrator's fraudulent actions and misappropriation of public funds that occurred prior to the scope of the auditor's report, but which was uncovered and reported on by the auditor's report.
Motion by Vice Chair Duncan. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Hall. Any discussion on this matter? Okay, hearing none, this also moves to our agenda action, which we'll take up momentarily. We now have 2 items under our action of the chair's report, and both of these deal with proposed rules, and I'll turn to our legal counsel, Mr. Brandon Walker, for this item. Mr. Walker.
Thank you very much, everybody. Vice Chair, Superintendent. So real quickly, I'll move through the rules. We have 2 rules in front of us. The first is 16 NCAC 06D.0403, and this is regarding providing information on child abuse and neglect. Now, this was an interesting rule in that much of everything that was required for the rule was already spelled out in statute. So what we simply had to do was a very brief rule where we incorporate the statute as reference on, and it was kind of pretty easy to go through OAH in that regard. So what we're asking with this rule is let me back up one moment. We had a public comment hearing on March 24th, 2022, and we didn't receive any public comments for this rule because, as I mentioned, it's pretty straightforward. So with that, we're asking the board to adopt the rule. If there's any questions regarding, and then I'll move on to our next rule. This one is regarding interscholastic athletics. It's 16 NCAC 06E.0204. Again, we had a public comment hearing on March 24th. We received one public comment, and we're working with both OAH and our team to incorporate the comment either in a temporary or the permanent rule. Again, this is regarding interscholastic athletics. General Counsel Allison Schaefer has worked closely with both the General Assembly and their counterparts to develop the rule. And with that, we're asking the board to adopt the rule. We have until the end of the month per the legislation to move it over to OAH.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Walker. Any questions or comments on these two rules that are on our action agenda? Hearing none, thank you, Mr. Walker.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Seeing that we have no other new business, colleagues, this concludes the chairman's report. Board members will now vote on any item requiring action from your committee reports. A thorough discussion and report was provided on each item, including any respective consent items. As a reminder, any item on the consent agenda is primarily not complex and may have come to the board for discussion in a prior month. I'll note also that board members have seen these consent agenda items for at least a week. At this time, I ask if there's a request to remove any item from the consent action or action on first read agendas. Hearing none, I ask for a motion to approve the following. The State Board of Education meeting minutes of April 6 and 7, 2022, SLA 1 through 3 and 7, EICS 1 through 3, HRS 1 and 2, GAC 1, BIZOP 1 through 3 and 5 and 6, the two proposed rules just presented by Mr. Walker, one concerning child abuse and neglect and the other interscholastic athletics and administering organizations for high school athletics. And then the two items just discussed in the chair's report, the Bridges Academy claim and the Northampton County Schools restart request. Is there a motion to that effect? Mr. Hall?
Yes.
So,
Second by the treasurer?
yes, sir.
Thank you. Any discussion on this motion? Hearing none, Ms. Martin, will you call the roll to capture the vote?
Yes, sir. Dr. Oxendine?
Yes.
Ms. Chemnitz?
Yes.
Mr. Keenan?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Dr. Tipton Rogers?
Yes.
Ms. White?
Yes.
Mr. Blackburn?
Yes.
Mr. Ford?
Yes.
State Treasurer Falwell?
Yes.
Lieutenant Governor Robinson?
Yes.
Lieutenant Governor Robinson? Vice Chair Duncan?
Yes.
Chair Davis?
Yes, the motion carries. That concludes our action agenda for the day, and I wish to thank all staff, presenters, and colleagues who participated in this meeting. And I now ask for a motion to adjourn this May 5th, 2022 meeting.
So moved.
Motion by Ms. Chemnitz, second by Mr. Blackburn,
Treasurer,
third by the treasurer. Ms. Martin?
Yes, sir. Dr. Oxendine?
Yes.
Ms. Chemnitz?
Yes.
Mr. Keenan?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Dr. Titten Rogers,
Yes.
Ms. White,
Yes.
Mr. Blackburn,
Yes.
Mr. Ford,
Yes.
State Treasurer Falwell,
Yes,
Lieutenant Governor Robinson.
yes, State Treasurer Falwell, yes.
Thank you. Vice Chair Duncan,
Yes.
Chair Davis.
Yes, motion carries. We stand adjourned. Thank you all.
Have a safe trip down east, my friend.
Next time,
Usually on Thursday, we're pretty much.